All right, well, welcome. My name is Reverend Tandy Rogers, and I serve the UUA. I serve you as your growth strategist in the growth office, alongside Stephen Jonason. And I have a foot in congregational life because I never wanted to leave. That's where the frontline growth experts are. A new day dawned when Scott Taylor joined the congregational life staff team and insisted on alignment and a high vision, and kind of fanned our inner flames that we carry with us. And part of the agenda that I am so excited about, he started talking about multi-sites as a growth initiative. And I said, I want in on that. Is there any way I can come over to Congregational Life staff again? Please, I'll do anything. And so I now get to work alongside Scott in the multi-site initiative. I would like to introduce to you your midwifing team. We've been affectionately calling it the multi-site midwifing team. These are your frontline growth experts out in the field, in the regions, who are fanning the flames and being the collaborators and coaches for the multi-sites. So if I could please have, I haven't had coffee, okay, enough coffee, so I got my little notes. Ken Brown, who's not with us today, he's with family right now, is in the Pacific Western region. I'm going to ask people to stand. In the New England region, we have Joe Sullivan and Karen Bellavance Grace. In the Mid-America region, we have Dory Davenport. We have in the Central East regional group, we have Mark Bernstein and Joan Van Biesler. Yay. In the Southern region, we have Ken Hurto and Carlton Elliott Smith. All right. So imagine, if you will, is 2064, 50 years from now. And at our General Assembly, we are celebrating with great gratitude this burst of growth that started in 2014, when the tides turned and a refreshed imagination of our polity came into effect, a refreshed imagination of interdependence, creative collaboration, a commitment to sustainability as a way toward mutual accountability. When models of multi-site, models of one church, many locations, popped up in the imaginations of staff, in the imagination of key volunteers, in the imagination of congregations trying to burst forth and wanting to do it with strong partners. Models of learning together, of surrendering, knowing the one right way, but learning from each other the many, many ways of being a Unitarian Universalist and many ways to organize ourselves. Also part of this turning, really more than a part, the actual fuel, the core, these multi-site models, these new ways of organizing fueled by a religious fervor, a religious imperative to show up together in a new way that amplifies our goodness, allows us to co-conspire with the ultimate goodness of the universe, amplifies our impact and amplifies our love. And let the story begin. Reverend Daniel O'Connell.
Good morning. You are going to hear a variety of models about how to do multi-site from our panel here. I'm just going to give you my personal experience with the version that we've done in Houston, Texas, which is where I'm from. You're going to hear other models, so you may hear things you like, you don't like about each of the models. That's good. Just try and keep your mind open, if possible. So there was this town in the United States, and it was a big city, and it had a First Unitarian Church, and it's been there for over 100 years. Maybe this sounds familiar to you. 17 years ago, there were some people who said, you know, it's too far to drive down to First Church. There's a number of us here. Why don't we start something here? And guess what? Boom! They started a UU congregation. And there were several of these that were outlying in the suburbs. And they Some of them had been UUs before, some of them had been not, but they were very excited about starting a brand new liberal religious community. They were very excited about doing social justice together in their community. They were very excited to bring their children together because their children were getting proselytized by right-wing evangelicals. And finally, they could bring UU values to their children. They could develop their own faith formation. This was really exciting, and they had two big dreams: to find a building they could call their own and to have their own minister. And for 16 years, they worked, they invited all their friends, they poured in their sweat, their money, their time, their talent, their treasure. They did all the work that many of you have done in your congregations. And still, that prize was always just out of reach. The closer they seemed to get it, the further away it was. They were caught in the catch-22 that almost all small congregations face. They do not have the resources to grow to the size where they can afford those resources. Meanwhile, the minister at First Unitarian Universalist Church in the big city, he's got staff, she's got staff, they've got money. Those staff are being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to produce content, and it stays right there at First Unitarian Universalist Church. Meanwhile, these other congregations are saying, you know, if we just try harder, if we just go to another General Assembly workshop, we could have a minister like that, we could have a building like that, and it doesn't happen. In our case, what happened is that one congregation, one of the satellite congregations, lost half their membership in a year because there was mold in their building and their quarter-time minister left. The other congregation lost half their members over 4 years through no fault of their own, but similar kinds of circumstances. So they were desperate enough to do something that, if you're going to follow the model I'm talking about, you would have to do. It all boils down, the central question is, if you're the joining church, and the big church is the adopting church, are you willing to give up control? And I mean completely, over finances, worship, everything. Are you willing to give up control in order to possibly achieve a level of success that has always eluded you? That's what's at stake. These two congregations that we merged with, they dissolved their charter and they joined us en masse. We are one church in 3 locations. And the creative interchange, the stuff that has happened is just absolutely incredible. So what's the advantage to the joining church if you're in that situation? Well, number one, you have an outside investment. You have a larger group who are committed to not only you surviving, but to you thriving. You get to research the senior minister. I guarantee you those people at the satellites went through and saw my sermon videos. They talked to people in my church. They had far more access to who their senior minister was going to be than the average person in a church that's got a search committee. The average person's like, okay, you know, we brought this person in and you get to vote yes or no. These people got to do all kinds of research. The big thing, though, is that the worship changed dramatically. At the small church, instead of the pulpit being a revolving door and you get some speakers who are, you know, so-so, and frankly, all the members of the smaller group had given all their talks. It had been 17 years, and so they were kind of talked out, right? So you have coherent worship, you have cohesive worship, and you have inspirational worship pretty much every Sunday because, frankly, that's what the standard is at the larger church. Now, what's the benefits for the adopting church? What was the benefit for me? My church is not paying for me to go merge with smaller congregations. What happens is that we get to grow Unitarian Universalism in our metro area. And there are people who actually live closer to the satellites who come to my church because of the resources. But once we merged, the attendance, the membership actually went up a little bit at the smaller ones. So it's really a win-win situation. There's new ideas, new talent. The smaller congregations were using screens and technology because they had to. At the larger church, we didn't need to do that. They had music talent that we did not have at the large church. We were able to move choirs around. All kinds of creative interchange happened because of this. It was a huge, huge benefit to us. And also, we were able to do social justice in a new way. All the congregations in Houston now are coming together on a project called UU Voice for Justice, And that probably wouldn't have happened. Oh, there's my little timer. That probably would not have happened had we not done this model. So the thought I want to leave you with is, if you've been struggling for years, and you're smart people, right? And you haven't been able to break through, and there's another well-off, well-resourced congregation, it might be willing to consider the question of how serious you are about growing Unitarian Universalism. And the bottom line question in this model is, are you willing to give up control? Why have 3 different bookkeepers use 3 different ideas about how to collect money, save money, and spend money? Why not have, oh, look, they've got a professional bookkeeper who's been doing it for 20 years. The possibilities are just amazing. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about it. I'm especially excited to learn about the other models that we have here today. I think you're going to be able to pick up something new in your own way of thinking. And so thank you for being here.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Kathleen Owens. I have been the associate at First UU Church of San Diego for 7 years and am now the lead minister. First UU Church of San Diego has been a long-time large church in an urban area. We have seeded 2 out of the 4 other smaller congregations within the county of San Diego. If you know California at all, the further west and south you go, the larger the counties. We have a wide landscape that we have 3 other congregations in the north county and 1 in the east. And it had long been a dream of First UU to seed a South Bay campus. It is the most underrepresented and underserved population in the county. And First Church was to do this. It took 2 years of planning, and we've been doing this now. South Bay campus started, and we celebrated our 5th anniversary in October. So we've moved around, we've experimented quite a lot, and are very excited. South Bay campus is now growing, and that's one of our challenges, because we moved from a school to a storefront, and now we're needing to either consider taking over more of the strip mall or moving into a different building. Why did we do this? It's long been a goal, and for 20 years in the strategic plans of First Church, it had never been fully accomplished. In fact, we started a South Bay campus, but it ended up going to the East County. So when Arvid Straube, the Reverend Dr. Arvid Straube came, that became one of the key points in the strategic plan. And then I came on about 2 years later, and we were able to have the staff that we needed to really start. We started in the South Bay because we wanted to be relevant to the communities in which we lived. And we wanted to increase the understanding of what a Unitarian Universalist looked like, sounded like, lived like, increase the diversity in a very intentional, multicultural, bilingual community. We did have folks who would travel the 17 to 20 miles or more from South County to attend Hillcrest, and they were part of the group that seeded the South Bay, but only part. Now, after 5 years, our membership is almost half and half. Half of the people have been at First Church for many years, and half are newcomers and have found us since we established our storefront. We are excited because we believe that we are reaching more people and they are changing who we are. The benefits to doing our model that we've experienced include not only has South Bay campus grown, but so has Hillcrest in diversity, in language, and in the style of worship. It's been an exciting opportunity to watch people who come to South Bay and then find Hillcrest, and some people go to Hillcrest and then go to the South Bay campus, because large church is not for everyone. Some people prefer that smaller community. So we have multiple cultures within 2 campuses, not just the ethnicity, race, and language, but we also have a small church, large church culture. We have different cultures around worship. What we did, though, is in a 4-Sunday month, the lead minister, the associate minister, and our intern all rotate through. And then the intern and the staff person, that's a part-time staff person, not a minister, lead a multi-generational service every month. So we have live services every month, and that has dramatically increased the attendance and the participation of the community. Also, the internship that we have, they spend 50% at Hillcrest and 50% at South Bay. That has made for the whole staff team to have a more cooperative and collaborative effort at our South Bay campus. We used to think that it was just one thing down there, but over the years we've developed, we are one church, one board, one finance committee, but 2 campuses offering a wider diversity of service, style, and community, and it's made a difference in people's lives. The challenges have been that it's complex, the services and the worship is more complex. That growing understanding about 2 campuses, not a large church, small church. We really watch our language and how we talk about both campuses and use that. There's a stronger understanding of culture and a deepening of what it means to be in relationship, and a widening of the understanding that we're working for the benefit of the whole, not just my church. And that has revolutionized how not only we think about Unitarian Universalism in our 2 campuses, but how it spreads across our county. And it has invited our county, the other churches in our county, to come together in a more powerful way, doing social justice, doing combined worship, combined choirs. Our theological underpinnings, we believe we have good news to say that saves the world, and that it's not just for people who can make it to that campus, but we are always seeking out who is not yet represented, who is yet to walk in the door. And I'm happy to say one of our South Bay families, one of the members of this family is now entering seminary because of her inspired call into ministry. So South Bay campus is producing its first seminarian at Meadville Lombard. We have at both of our campuses, we now have a total of 4 people going into seminary or are in seminary now. And it's just a live and active community at San Diego. So thank you. Hope it helps.
As Wendy comes up and watching some people, scribble notes madly, I hope some of those notes are questions. We will have questions after this, right? I'm sure I can see them bubbling up all over your head, above your head. And there's also seats down here and over here on the side, and they're very comfortable, so you don't have to sit on the floor. You can come.
Hello. My name's Wendy Williams, and I'm the senior minister at Jefferson Unitarian Church in Golden, Colorado. I was called there 3 years ago, and as that search process was happening, inside the church there was a decision to live into our mission, which is to nurture souls, grow Unitarian Universalism, and transform the world beyond our walls. Already an encore, such a good event. Our mission is to nurture souls, grow Unitarian Universalism, and transform the world beyond our walls. That's what attracted me to Jefferson Unitarian Church, was that mission. So while I was in search, they were deciding, yes, we're going to do this, and we're going to start a second campus. And so the work that was being done in that congregation by staff, not the ministry team, but by a staff member, leaned into and a team went to visit San Diego. So we really leaned into that model, and we started a church about 25 or 30 miles from our main campus, and that's in Evergreen, Colorado, which is a mountain community. The decision was made that we want to grow Unitarian Universalism, and like most good missions, I'm not sure we knew what that meant. Because I really think that we probably were thinking grow Unitarian Universalists, right? And that's part of Second Campus. And I think further that we sort of thought, well, we're just going to get a little me. A little me. And it's a long time since Jefferson Unitarian Church was a small church. Long time. We're about 780 now. And so it's been a very, very long time since it was just a budding enterprise. So that's created a lot of learning for us. And unlike Kathleen, where there's been a long-standing yearning to serve a particular community that the church felt was underserved, in our context, we had to look that we live in the Denver metro area, and there are several churches. There's 2 right in Denver. There's 2 just outside of Denver. There's our congregation 15 miles west of Denver, and then there's 2 congregations in the Boulder area, which is also not far away. So where are we? There wasn't this long yearning, but we said, how are we going to live our mission? And 2 geographic areas were identified. One was the mountain community, and the other was a northern suburb area. And for a myriad of reasons, it was decided that the best chance for success was in the mountain community. We're 3 years in. Our first more than a year, we were just having that campus meet once a month, which I'll just tell you is a very challenging way to grow church. Additionally, we were in a multi-purpose room in a charter school with all of the charm that implies. So there was a soda machine off on the left that just at the wrong point in the hymn would kick in to chill the Coke. You know, it's just kind of tough sledding. The church dynamics piece really played a big role for us. How do we understand if and most of the reading that you can do around multi-site ministry is to take the DNA of the large church and bring it to the small church. Well, that first requires that you understand what your DNA is. What's your North Star? And then you have to have a fundamental understanding of what are church dynamics and how can you make the essence of your North Star relevant when there's maybe only 20 or 40 or 50 or 60 people in the room. How do you get key leaders who live there? And we happen to have a wonderful Second Campus team, most of whom live in that community, who do great work. But really owning that as the staff has been a long time in coming. We now actually meet in a church, in a Presbyterian church, the great story of which is that there's a young family that comes, and 2 little girls were sitting with their mother, and they looked because there's a cross behind the chancel, and the one little girl said to her mother, "Mama, what's the T stand for?" It's both charming and deeply troubling that we live in that level of theological illiteracy, but in any event. But it has taken our staff a long time. As you know, in your congregations, there's many things like people are, wow, that's a great idea. Yeah, let's do it. And they assume somebody else will do it. It has taken our staff a long time to say, how do we understand ourselves, not just to do our work here where our office is, but also there. Yeah. And then even though the congregation was very excited about it, it is an ongoing challenge for us to really wrestle with not saying they and them. And almost when will this experiment be over? Or what, and a misperception. And I think as leaders in our congregation, we need to revisit this ourselves. What's our ultimate goal? Because the church spin-off model that Kathleen referenced as First Church in San Diego, doing with the 4 other congregations in San Diego County, that's an understood model. So it's like, when are we going to cut that campus loose is one thing that we hear, or still them. So, so in the main, our goal was to grow Unitarian Universalism, and I think even though we started out thinking Unitarian Universalists, I think we've increased our understanding of what Unitarian Universalism is, and this has been a wonderful way of doing that. And the last thing I'll say is that for me, the ultimate reason that we're doing this and that I'm so committed to it is this is how we foundationally live our theology. We have committed to one another as congregations, which we renew at every General Assembly. Here's why we're together. This is it. We shouldn't be competing with one another. Our message is too important, and if we can't strengthen each other, if we can't stand together and find ways of putting Unitarian Universalism in pockets where it doesn't exist, then I'm afraid our faith will die, and will die on our watch, and I can't have that happen. Amen.
Notice how hard we work to color coordinate. Again, I want to introduce myself as Scott Taylor, Director of Congregational Life, but this is my new life. I should also introduce myself by my old life, which was serving with my wife, Reverend Karen Anderson, in Rochester, New York, and Canandaigua, New York. I served the last 5 years of my ministry, served 2 congregations, co-senior minister at the First Unitarian Church of Rochester and lead minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, where we had a yoked relationship. So that's the model I want to share today. But I first want to kind of step back and highlight that today is really sort of, I was thinking of it as a taste, right? I was thinking advertisement, but that minimizes things too much. But as a taste. And the reason I say that is the wonderful multi-site midwife team that was introduced to you at the beginning of this, represents field staff that serve you across the country. And we are glad to coordinate with you to bring a bigger workshop around multi-site to any of your districts or regions where we can have more than a taste, but really sit down and have a meal together on this. So I wanted to make sure and make that clear to folks. The other thing I wanted to do before I share my model or the yoked is sort of step back and think about what we just heard. Because we have such limited time today, we don't have a chance to draw pictures, but I want to highlight sort of the 4 models that you've heard. And from my perspective, if you've not already kind of, if this hasn't been teased out explicitly, I want to do it now. So notice what we've seen, one model as being what might be called the merger model, which is what Daniel had represented. And you notice the word culture popped up when all of us were talking. And I would say in that merger model, what you have is a merging, or as Daniel was trying to say, just straight up, a giving up of culture, right? So a merging and even a giving up of culture is part of that experience. Kathleen got up, and I would describe her model maybe as a campus model. So campus model, and in that you have, well, how would I put that one? That one I would say sort of reaching multiple cultures, right? That's the power of that model. So instead of merging or giving up culture, you used her model as one to reach another culture. Wendy got up and did the satellite model, which that I think might be described as extending one's culture, right? Not reaching another culture, not requiring somebody to give up a culture, but extending a culture that you have. The model that I want to lift up that is, we're calling different things. Sometimes it's called a yoked model. If you're a Midwest kid like me, that makes sense because you've grown up with cows and you know what that means. But if that doesn't work for you, or you don't want to feel like cows, the other thing we call this is a partnership or a staff sharing model. And I wanted to say it that way because in this case, it's not merging cultures, it's not extending culture, it's not adding a new culture. It's two unique cultures coming together to share staff and expand the power of each congregation's unique culture. Does that kind of make sense as distinction? So merging culture, reaching multiple cultures, extending culture, two unique cultures coming together to share and have more robust services. Two cultures coming together to do something new and bigger together. I want to quickly run through so that the yoked or the sharing model, I would say, has a unique form. So the unique form is staff sharing. Think of this model as staff sharing. So unlike mergers or satellites, what makes the web in this case, I mean, you can imagine sort of a picture. What makes the web in this case is not so much the congregations, but a web of staff serving multiple congregations. So the web in this case that's holding things together is staff. And that can be, if the congregations are larger, that can be a whole staff team serving multiple congregations. Or if they're smaller, that might be two congregations coming together to even share one staff member. But still, it's important to understand this. The staff sits there as sort of the web that starts to pull things together. There's also, I would say, a unique desire in this model. I think you've heard a lot of theological, evangelical desires for the other mergers. This one is a little more practical. There's a practical desire to eliminate redundancies and create more sustainable ministry, which I'll go in together. So it's more of a practical approach. The other thing I would say is it has a unique relational experience. When you have two models coming together to share staffing, that's very different than the feeling of having to give something up or to merge. Now there's pluses and minuses, right? You stay separate. There's some real downsides in not being able to combine as powerfully as the other models. But that definitely makes it a different relational experience. And then the other thing I would highlight is a unique way of growing together, which leads me into strengths, okay? So that's the what. That's the what of the yoked. The strengths of this model, again, just if you have the picture in your mind of multiple congregations, and I don't mean to make it like top down or over, but for, right now, just so you can visualize, if the staff serve as sort of that web, I think that speaks to one of the strengths, right? So this model preserves much of each congregation's independence and unique identity. So you can see how that is I see there's being some downsides in that, but in our culture, I think there are politics involved. Our independence is very strong among us for some unhealthy and for some healthy reasons. But to the degree that we have some healthy reasons to hold on to unique pieces of our identity that we don't want to lose, that is the strength of this model. It doesn't require you to give those up. I'm looking at some of my friends here. For instance, the yoked relationship we had, the smaller church of Canandaigua had the practice of joys and sorrows. We all know kind of the debates around joys and sorrows. Nobody had to give up joys and sorrows, right? Nobody had to give up their unique music in some ways to be served by one staff. At the same time, I would say the strength is that this model allows one to organically and more naturally grow towards shared DNA and mission. Now, again, I want to argue that there's even more power in the other models, as everybody was saying, to have one church in multiple places, one mission binding you together. First of all, there's just amazing power in that, right? But practically, we all know the politics of if the way you start to dance before we get on the dance floor is we have to do a common mission statement together. 4 years before we get to the dance floor, 8, 10, wordsmith, So what the model, this unique way of growing together, I describe more as, it is shared DNA, but it comes at it differently than mission-based. I picked up the word family-based because our family is a blended family. This is an odd analogy maybe, but my 2 stepkids, non-biological children, many people come up to me and say, God, they look just like you. They don't look just like me at all, right? Not at all, but what they do is have my mannerisms. So we have grown together over time, not by having shared DNA, but slowly over time becoming one family, and out of that arises mission. So it's a model that allows you to let mission come organically rather than being the front end. And I'm not arguing better one way or the other. You have to decide what fits your unique situation. The last thing I would highlight about the strengths. How am I doing, Tandy? Oh, crud. All right. Oh. Well, I'll take 3 and be real quick. All right. So the last one is this model. Remember when I talked about being practical? I mean, and again, I don't want to minimize it, but there's some real practical strengths of this. It enables what I would say sustainable and efficient ministry. So those are the 2 reasons. Those are 2 practical reasons you might do this model. So first of all, on sustainable ministry, we all know, those of us who are in smaller congregations or serve smaller congregations, how hard it is when you have a minister at a quarter time or half time, how much turnover happens in a congregation, and how hard that is, almost unkind to the ministry staff involved. So in terms of our movement getting serious about getting sustainable ministry for the sake of congregations and for the sake of kindness to ministers themselves, having 2 or 3 congregations come together to have one full-time position is one of the huge benefits of that. The same thing I would say about maybe larger churches coming together. There's sustainability there where ministers, I mean, by allowing instead of 3 solo ministers to each serve separately 3 different congregations, ask any religious professional in the room, whether minister or RE, they are hungry to be on a team. And if you give them the options of serving an isolated congregation solo all by yourself for 10 years, or being able to be on a creative team where we all get to play to our strengths, that person will stay there for 20 years. Is that making sense? Okay. Efficiency is the last one that I'd highlight real quick. So that's sustainable. There's also efficient ministry. I don't have time to go into this, but the simplistic thing is when you look around in any of our areas and you take a geographic area and you notice on any given week, we have 5 ministers spending anywhere from 50 to 70 hours. I don't know how, including reading books. Some of us happen to read books to write these sermons, right? So you have 5 ministers spending 60 to 80 hours to do 5 separate sermons that they only give once. Versus if you united there, you could have 1 minister writing a sermon and rotating around.
Amen, brother.
All right? Sermons would be better. And think about all the freed up time and energy for other justice work, for other membership work, for other coaching of lay leaders, and maybe even a little bit of time to go see the movies for your staff, right? So that's the one on efficiency. I could go into that more, but I think that simplistic idea makes enough sense. 3 quick challenges and weaknesses. The challenges or weaknesses of this model is it requires incredibly savvy staff. And what I mean by that is it relies on the personality of staff to make sure that they are not just doing their preferred programs, but paying attention to the unique identity of each congregation and tailoring programming to make sure to preserve that identity. That's not an easy task. It's a lot easier if we're just trying to replicate. So that's a big challenge for your staff. It also takes congregational vigilance. Because the 2 congregations aren't starting off merging as one, you have to always work to find opportunities to break out of your silos. So one best example I give is it will not work. You will not grow together as one family if what you do, for instance, with your small group program is just you do your small group program, even if it's the same kind of small group program over here, and then the other group would do it over here, is not the same as you finding opportunities to suddenly have a small group program made up of half of one congregation, half of the other. But vigilantly trying to find creative ways that you actually grow together as a family, not stay in your separate worlds just served by this one staff, is a huge challenge. The other one is this model requires policy governance for any size church. Because if you're going to have one team or one minister trying to creatively serve all these multiple needs, we have to empower that team or that ministry with the ability to have big boundaries, big buckets of boundaries, but be able to make managerial decisions on the spot. We all know how policy governance is this hot button for all of us, so that's why it's a challenge. But you have to work through that to be able to get to this model. I think I'd stop there. The last thing I'd say is theologically, I have served, 5 congregations so far. I've served all size congregations so far. It wasn't until the last 5 years of my ministry that I ever felt that I served a Unitarian Universalist congregation. Because I served 2 congregations trying to break out of silos and be more together. And it's the first time I would say that I ever served a congregational system that reflected our theology of interdependence.
Right on. That's cool.
And that was powerful for me and a huge gift. And is a large reason why I'm very grateful for everybody sharing what they did and for you being here as well. So thank you.
Okay, so start formulating your questions. And I'm going to request that you not come to the microphone and tell your story, because you're going to have opportunities to do that. I'm going to tell you how to get connected. So I'm going to name by region, I'm going to name your midwifing team again, so you know that if you aren't already connected to this rise in the tide, we want to include you. And so if you are from the Pacific Western region, Ken Brown, and I'm also seeing Gina Lise, Doran Adams, Gina Lise. If you are from New England, it's Joe Sullivan and Karen Bellavance Grace. If you're from Mid-America, it's Dory Davenport. Oh, there's Dory. If you're from the Central Eastern regional group, Mark Bernstein and Joan Van Beesler are your go-to people. And then if you're in the Southern region, it's Ken Hurto and Carlton Elliott Smith. And if you're sitting here thinking, I don't know what my region is, contact me, trogers@uua.org, and we will totally get you hooked up. Now, we're getting you hooked up into are resources that are being developed as we do this cross-learning. We've got learning circles going on, so you could virtually have a learning team that you don't have to make this stuff up on your own. You get together and talk about what are the challenges with folks who are also doing this work. And if you want the full meal deal workshop, then we can also help make that happen. So we want to receive your questions now. Please come to the microphone so everybody can hear you and ask these good. You can ask a global question. You can ask an individual question about any of the models. Come on up. Come on up, siblings in faith.
Hi, I'm Julie Leach from Sarasota, Florida congregation. Just have a question for both San Diego and Jefferson. Could you just explain your staffing model really quickly for each of those two? And the worship is, you said it was live, and I didn't hear about the Jefferson one,
So in San Diego, we've grown into what we do right now. And when we were at the school and we did not have an intern focused on South Bay, they had sermons that were part live, because Arvid would go down there once a month and I would go down there once a month, and the other two were videoed a week delay. Once we put together our internship to be half at each campus, that allowed live services, and our part-time staff coordinator of that ministry team works with our intern, is a worship associate, helps facilitate program. So Kristen Carriga is our staff person part-time at that. She also is part-time social justice. And South Bay wanted its advertising to be through justice work in the community, so it was a very natural fit to put her at South Bay. So we now have 4 live services. One of those will be multi-generational. Our children stay in 2 of those services a month for the whole service. And then 2, they go to their own RE class, which is parent-driven, parent-led. So we have shared staff. Our membership person is the same at both campuses, but we do membership differently at South Bay than we do at Hillcrest in terms of process. That's true across the board. All of our staff have offices at Hillcrest campus, but the intern and the South Bay minister both also have an office at South Bay and hold regular office hours.
Boy, do I wish our answer was that simple, which sounded complicated enough. So our staff has been undergoing a great deal of transition for a number of reasons, and we don't have a clear staffing model for our second campus. What we have had is a staff member who started out as our volunteer coordinator and is now our director of congregational engagement. She has really held this thing together. And the transition in our staff has been a lot of ministers, actually, because we have gone from a very specialized ministry model where there was silos, essentially, to my expectation, which is that if you are a minister, you have to be able to preach, pray, and be able to stand up and say something in public to witness at a social justice event. So we're in that transition, so that has meant that we haven't had the stability running through our second campus in terms of preachers. For the coming year, we have a new assistant minister beginning on August 1. We also have an intern. So my commitment to the second campus, we meet twice a month, is that the three of us will rotate. They will only be getting us, only the three of us. And we'll be hiring a site coordinator.
I just wanted to chime in because we have a slightly different model. So we have 3 campuses. Each campus has its own religious educator. Each campus has its own campus minister. One is quarter time, one is half time, and we scale things accordingly. We also have a creative team meeting every week where we go over all the sermons, all the adult and children's faith formation stuff. But getting the model right is tricky because a lot of times it hasn't been done before. So that's how we do it.
Hi, I'm Jane Page, and my question is probably a little more on the emotional side of things and how to deal with some congregants' feelings. I am completing my 8th year in Statesboro, Georgia, as their halftime minister. Starting in September, I will also be the halftime minister in Brunswick, Georgia, which is 2 hours down the road. I have rented a little small apartment there, and so I'm hoping to have a great yoked ministry, as you talked about, and being able to. We even have a workshop plan for sharing our ministers, sharing our ministries. So we're trying to be very upbeat about it. But I've had a couple of board members that said it feels like I'm having an affair. I've told them, I said, well, it's polyamory. You know, it's going to be all right. But and I can laugh about it a little bit, but I really am a little concerned because I've been with them so long about these feelings, and even on the other side too. When I was in Brunswick with the program committee planning, I said something about, well, at my home, and I was speaking about my home in Statesboro, and they said we would like for you to say my home in Statesboro. So it's a little bit of feeling of whose am I guess. Mm-hmm. And that's not the way I wanted it to feel like, and I don't think it does with everybody, but there are some that I don't know, maybe you can, if you've dealt with it, share with me.
Scott?
Yikes. All joking aside about your polyamory, actually maybe I do want to joke. The South, right, is where you're from?
The deep South.
Yeah, I'd recommend probably not putting that in your mission statement in the end. But you know, all experiments are useful. I think you answered your own question. In my experience, I mean, in serious about talking about love, I think this is a human problem, not really a technical. There's a ton of technical stuff, right, that we could think of. But if you love both equally, they will know it. If the unique identity of each is parts that you appreciate the diversity of each genuinely, not really favor the one, and they get the feeling that really you're just slyly trying to morph the other. But if you genuinely love them and the uniqueness of each church, I think it all takes care of itself. The other thing I would say is, I think systems-wise, it's a great opportunity, from what you just said, to help both congregations move from discussions around loving the minister to loving the work. Amen. I mean, and that's what every congregation needs to go through no matter what. And loving each other. No, that's great.
Hi, my name is Molly Hausch-Gordon. I serve our congregation in Columbia, Missouri. And my congregation is surrounded east, north, and west for about 115 miles or more by rural farmland and progressive people in those places who feel very isolated. And so I would be interested in hearing if there are any congregations. I know a lot of our congregations in the Mid-America region may be in similar situations, and I'm interested to hear if there's anyone doing that particular form of rural outreach. And the second part of my question has to do with what's been represented here today. It's mostly been large churches seeding sort of or merging with or yoking with mini church, sort of done in a very traditional church way. And I am with a mid-sized church. It doesn't have a large staff team. And I'm wondering if there are models of doing less traditional church models, house churches, commissioning lay leadership. What kind of other models are there other than a large church seeding a mini church, even if it's not a mini me? Are we experimenting with different models that might be more functional for folks in different resourcing situations? Columbia, Missouri.
I think to your first question, and I feel a bit remiss in not mentioning this, I think Christine Robinson in Albuquerque, who started this before San Diego, and she's one of the pioneers for us in this. Her situation is very similar to yours geographically, where they have 2 other sites through technology and lay worship associates that have a live liturgy but a streamed sermon, but it comes from that church in downtown Albuquerque. And she would be a great contact and resource about the geography and extending yourself without extending your staff. And
Albuquerque's great because they were also much smaller than they are, the main campus, than they were before they started. And not only did the other campuses that they are extended into growing, but the main campus is also growing. So it's one of those, if you want to learn, you teach. If you want to grow, you spread the word out.
Yeah, and also I should say I am not at a large church. When I got to Houston, it was 299. It's about 370. That's a mid-size too. I actually think the mid-sized congregations may be in the best position to do new satellite starts. If you're at a 1,000-member congregation and you go 10%, that's 100 people, right? So why would you bother with something that was really, really small? We also tend to be in metro areas. So one model is, you mentioned house churches and commissioning lay leaders. I think that really could be a perfect model for your size congregation. That was what I intended to do, but this other thing landed in our laps. But the idea is you do your adult faith formation, growth groups, covenant groups, whatever you want to call it, and you start those at about a 10-mile distance from where your current congregation is, or whatever thing makes sense. Because people who are more than 10 miles will probably not drive into Columbia from wherever they are. But I would definitely underscore Christine Robinson. I think we've all learned from her. She's had workshops here at GA. She's got, I think, 4 different and very different satellites. So she's really been able to look at it in a lot of different ways.
I would second, because you had 2 sort of questions, right? How to reach out when they aren't there, but also different size. The first thing I would highlight about the yoked is it happens in our case to have been size, but really I would say the model does not depend on the size, and it really was sharing staff. The other thing I would say is we have 5 examples of small congregations coming together, and another 3 or 4 of mid-sizes coming together to do yoking. So we have that out there. And when Tandy talked about the learning circles, so besides Albuquerque, I would say that's where the learning circles will come in, because we just sort of have been at this for more than a year. So you have plenty of resources there. And then the other thing I would say is what makes me very excited about the multi-site is connecting it with congregations and beyond. Because part of when we talk about networks, I think we need to talk about not networks of congregations, but networks of connection points, right? Eventually where we're going is it could be a house church, it can be a intentional living community, but all networked together.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi. Al Daniels, Norwich, Connecticut. And our picture is, it's one of those of, we are afraid of becoming an example of Brown versus the Board of Education, separate not being equal. Our fear is that, and to keep the story short, a couple of years ago we sold our old big building, so now we're flush with cash, short on members, a couple of growing congregations in the area, so this model would work, one of these models would work really well. But now do we just hand over the cash and all of a sudden, we're the redhead stepchild in the crew and they're, having to always go to them with our hand out.
Now, a minute.
So that is our fear. And a number of congregations, other small congregations, have come to us and said, oh, we should get together and do this. And it's like, and we push our hands deeper in our pockets and say, come on now, what do you bring to the table? That's our fear. And the two, just so you know, the two bigger congregations, they've had plans in the works for things to go on, and you hear over the grapevine, we just couldn't quite make it to the goal to make that happen. So we believe our fears are legitimate.
Before we answer, have you met Joe Sullivan?
Hi, Joe.
He's your midwife coach. All right.
Yeah, and Joe's a great guy. So when we merged, one of the congregations that we merged with was called Thoreau in Stafford, Texas. And they had $300,000 dedicated to a building fund. So they had essentially the same concern that you have. The three big concerns that came up were about identity, about money, and about the video sermons. And I'm sure we can all address all three of those, but I'll just stick with the money part. So there were all kinds of elaborate plans that were hatched. Oh, we'll set up a separate 3-member commission that will be a separate nonprofit corporation, and they'll make the decisions and so forth. And basically, now you're talking about trust. Because if you don't have trust, I tell you what, policy governance will never work, right? And the merger will never work either. So how do you demonstrate that you're worthy of that trust? Well, probably in your church and other churches, people give bequests. They give money to the endowment. There are designated gifts. And there's an understanding that not only will the current leadership abide by those rules, but the future leadership will. And so people make those gifts all the time. So what we said was, okay, we're gonna get this into our governance documents that says that this money can only be used to purchase real estate in Fort Bend County. And if that's not done in 20 years, I think the money goes to the UUA or something like that. There are safeguards that you can put into place to take care of that. But the other thing I would say about identity is the people who are at the location make up the identity, right? You can change your building, you can change all this stuff, but the loss of identity is a real issue, but the money part is actually pretty straightforward if you have the trust.
I just wanted to speak also to capacity and being strategic. So people who helped seed the South Bay campus from Hillcrest wanted the same amount of programs, the breadth of programming and worship and music, and we didn't have the capacity to do the same at both places. We don't have the capacity of lay leadership at South Bay that we do the Hillcrest. So we've had to engage in the conversation about how do we maintain our capacity and engagement of leaders and be extremely strategic about where we are putting our resources, not just of money, but of energy and people's time. And it took a little while for the older folks who have been part of Hillcrest to get used to thinking in that model. But they have found that they have found a deeper commitment, and they've gone deeper in the programs because there are fewer, but it's not less in quality, not less in depth, and not less in relationship building. And being more strategic has allowed them to do things that Hillcrest cannot do. And we've had Hillcrest folks join South Bay in some of that programming because it's only happening at South Bay, like the language exchange, like our detention center visitation program, and other things.
Hi, my name is Patricia Hennigan, and I'm from the UU Congregation of Princeton, New Jersey. And I have a question. When you set up the satellite location, particularly for San Diego, what does that initial outreach look like, and how is it received, and how do you reach the people in the new area to get interest there?
Well, we followed the UUA's recommendation by doing a mailing, and we put a lot of time in demographic study and a lot of time in making a really flashy postcard that got mailed out, and we really created some nice enemies. They didn't want that stuff mailed to them. Now, that's not true for everybody, and some people found us solely through that. But what really worked for us, we moved out of a suburban elementary school onto Broadway in a strip mall that had a big sign. And we are situated between the tattoo parlor, the karate studio, and a hairdresser's. We've had our young adults from our Hillcrest campus come down to the various parks in Chula Vista and do guerrilla chalk art. We've had tattoos, temporary tattoos on our forearms with our website. We have been extremely out front at every festival, every fair, every public gathering in Chula Vista with a booth, with our literature, and the fact that we had bilingual people in our campus ready to go really made a difference for Chula Vista.
So you got the building before you had the people?
Well, we had the people before. Actually, we had more people than we did building, but our growth really started when we got downtown Broadway rather than a suburban elementary.
Thank you.
Sure.
And for the record, I am not the one who told her to do mail.
The mail worked for the traditional folks, but it didn't work for the wider culture of folks we were going for.
Right.
Good to know.
I'm Pat Manley. I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church, area church at First Parish in Sherborne, Massachusetts. When I put my zip code into the UUA.org to find a congregation, 70 come up within 25 miles. The closest to and I belong to the church that is closest to me, but two churches very close that my congregation in Sherborne is in between are both struggling. One struggling desperately to stay alive in big, old New England church buildings with huge building costs. And I have been saying for a long time, how do we get us to work together without the church that is the most successful feeling like chauvinists and being perceived as chauvinists? And what are you trying to get out of us, and are you trying to make us close? So I'm fascinated by all of these models, particularly, well, not even particularly, but the yoked model seems the most possible. But I am very concerned about how we even make that initial outreach to say, how do we talk together? Once or twice.
In some ways, I'm very tempted not even to answer because you've just lifted up a challenge for us all. And I'm thinking about the Cambridge platform. I mean, the other reason I'm very excited about multi-site is I think there's possibilities of not just seeing this as a technical fix, but a chance to go back. And we all should be rereading the Cambridge platform about the hopes that what this really was about was not just having Joe come out to help you technically figure out how to do this better, but having Joe come out and midwife a discussion among you all to find the mission that you all have for that zip code area. So this is not just about mission for each church, but what mission do we want together for that region? So, I mean, there's a lot of, again, technical things I would do we can answer, but I think that's the bigger issue. And by the way, New England is ripe for this.
Oh, yeah.
There's a different model about reaching out to make sure in the West or the Midwest or other parts of the country, how do we fill the gaps in between the churches with some of these models? How do we fill out the blank spots or that space? But in New England,
yeah, when we're 3 miles apart, there aren't these big gaps.
Right. And again, I don't want to get all preachy, but our heart should break because it does not represent our theology to have 5 congregations stone throw and siloed.
Right. Absolutely.
I do want to get preachy. So let me say this. I shared this with the panel in a phone conversation that we had. One of the most heartbreaking experiences I've had at a General Assembly it was at one of those in-gatherings for the various regions. And the staff had for every congregation that was in the room, we had to say something that was going well for us and then a challenge. And the very heartfelt hope was that we would hear ourselves in each other's voices, representing that Cambridge platform, that we are there for each other, that we do represent a greater whole. And what I witnessed in that room, this was early in my ministry, what I witnessed in that room is when somebody would say, oh, we've got this going well, there's a sense of, oh, well, we could never do that, right? And when there was an elder fellow from a small congregation who stood up and introduced himself and with tears in his eyes said, I'm so tired. My congregation is so small. We are getting older. We don't know if we should just sell the building. We've tried every outreach we can think of. We can't attract a minister. What do we do? And we're in a conservative area. And what I heard around me was, well, we're in a conservative area and we're 400. Well, we're in a conservative area, but we've got multiple men. I heard this competition. And I think what Scott is saying is just alive and well. We need to understand ourselves as a greater whole. Yes. We just do. And so we have to understand that there are only 3,500 of us or whatever there are at this General Assembly. And there are many, many more that are in our congregations that don't get to have their fire lit, that not only don't have the learnings of workshops, the memories of meeting new friends, the ironies of the phrases you collect, like we were worshiping at the Dunkin' Donut Center. I mean, just how fabulous is that? but you don't have that sense that you are marching in the same way. So good for you that you're raising this. It's a challenge for all of us to take this back to our congregations. It says, how are we not only members of our own congregation, but how do we not just neighbor each other, but how do we companion each other on the journey?
That's right.
End of sermon. Thank you for listening.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yep, 2 more.
Good morning. My name is Michael Brown. I'm currently starting my 5th of 3 years at Meadville Lombard. And as a seminarian, I realized that and with someone with an accounting background, I'm wondering about the elements of allocation of salaries for shared staff. I would envision there would be circumstances where there are congregations that are financially healthy, sharing staff with congregations that aren't. And I have seen at my time on the board of my home congregation, believe it or not, conflict about money. Who knew? But has there been any discussion in these various examples? And oh, by the way, I should say, this question probably to you too. Are the regions working on some models of compensation? What percentage, what congregation gives based on what percentage of time each staff is at each site? And is there a component of this that relates to the ministers of each congregation being a part of this conversation that makes it more than just about money?
So 2 things that we do in Houston. One is that we're able to do this. Everyone is paid fair compensation. The second thing is that 90% of the money that's raised at any particular campus stays at that campus. That was just one of the things that one of the smaller campuses wanted to have in place to make sure that one of the other campuses just didn't take the money. So fair compensation, 90% of the money stays there. One of the campuses the size that they can afford quarter-time ministry. However, because of this team model, that minister isn't there once a month. That minister is there every Sunday. They're the face with the place. The other campus has enough resources to have half-time ministry. So that person is still there every week. They're the face with the place. The difference is how often they preach live and what else they do. Because we're in more than one site, the campus minister at one place might be quarter-time at one campus, but might be half-time at a different campus because of the way the resources go. But it basically follows the UUA guidelines in terms of fair compensation. And I think it's possible as we go forward, especially in these models that you've heard today, that there are going to be opportunities where they're going to be looking for new campus ministers. This is like a job creation machine for ministry if it keeps going well.
I was just going to say again, remember the thing about this being the taste. I mean, this is one of the things. Those details are what, when we bring workshops to different districts and regions, we do go down into some of that technical detail piece. So I just wanted to use that as an opportunity to highlight, to be continued.
My name is Bill Clinton, and I'm from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Delaware County, right outside of Pennsylvania. And we're looking at a multi-site arrangement. And Scott, my question is to you. So you had described five or six different opportunities to be a minister at different churches, and that in this last one where you were doing the multi-site, you felt like you were being a Unitarian Universalist minister, and for the first time, which I think was your statement. I was very curious about what that was, and my question is: so, what was it for you as a minister? And then how was it for the congregation? Did they feel as if they were having a different experience?
Yeah, so... Yeah.
Mark is a good friend.
Right, well, actually, any of my friends from First Unitarian of Rochester or Canandaigua, if you're here, could you stand up? So number one, talk with the folks that are here, and they'll be able to share, I think, some of the great promise and things that felt good, and some of the things that are challenging about going into that relationship. So let me just defer that, and they can give you that honest. And the story will be both, you know, of just like any family coming together, two families coming together. There's great love, great privilege, great moments, and other. I guess I would just repeat again, for me, it wasn't the first time I felt like I was a Unitarian minister, but the first time I felt I was serving a congregational structure that reeked or just projected our theology of interdependence. I just don't think how you can draw our current, the way we have our organizational structure set up on a sheet of paper and say that reflects our theology. It reflects independence, it reflects other values. It was just simply that. And I was just saying there's a real heart piece in that for me. And so it was more just speaking from that personal place.
All right. Friends, it is time. I invite you to stay if you've got more questions to interact, but I want to release you and honor our time together so that you can get on to your lunch. Make sure you drink lots of water. Keep connected. Make sure you meet your midwife staff. And how about we meet back here in 50 years and celebrate